Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks very much for coming along to our latest session on understanding copyright with Ellie Pridgeon. Today we are looking at exhibitions. This is the fourth in our series. The previous three recordings of them are available on our website. So if you do want to catch up or want to see anything there, please do go and have a look. Ellie is a copyright expert and will be able to take your questions at the end of the session as well after the presentation. Just to let you know, we are recording this session, and so if you could please turn your cameras and microphones off, it would be very welcome, and also you won't then appear on the recording. And also, if you do have any questions throughout, please just use the chat box at the bottom. Thank you very much, and I'll pass you over to Ellie. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much there. Sorry, I'm just seeing whether I can't see myself on the screen. Is that right?
We can see you.
Or does it not matter? Yeah. You can see. Okay, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, but we can't see you share. If you put your presentation up, we can't see that yet.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do that in a second. Right, okay. I was just checking that you could actually see me. That's
we
fine.
Can see you, Ellie. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Right, hello and welcome. This is the fourth copyright session. So I know that some of you have attended the previous session. So to some extent, we are actually building on those. So those are, as we said, actually available online if you want to watch the previous three. There'll also be a final follow-on one for this, which will be at the end of November or beginning of December. But more about that in due course. Right, so I'm going to share my screen now. Right, can everyone see the, I hope everyone can see the PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Excellent. Right, so like the other sessions, I just want to go through this in two halves. So in the first half of the talk, I'm just going to give an overview of copyright and exhibitions. So we're looking mainly at physical and in-person exhibitions, but I will make reference to online exhibitions. But essentially, you know, in terms of copyright, as we know, making a copy for, you know, a physical copy and, you know, creating copies online are generally, in most cases, it has the same kind of copyright rules and regulations. So I'm going to give you an overview of copyright and exhibitions as we stand in 2021. There are lots of question marks, especially when it comes to kind of digital, like for example, terminals and this type of kind of digital technology. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. Second part of the talk, I'm going to, it will be a case study. It's the case study of Wac Arts, which is a project that I worked on between 2017 and 2019, based in North London. And I will talk a little bit about how the organisation actually managed the two exhibitions which they held in the space of a couple of months. Right, okay, so now as we know, copyright is very complex. Questions at the end, I'll try and answer them, but it might be that I need to go away and discover a bit more, or it may be that there's you know, there's kind of no answer because it hasn't actually been tested out, as it were, in the UK. So I'll do my best to answer the questions. Any questions I don't answer, then obviously, like before, I will you know, I can get back to you by email in the next couple of weeks. So right, okay, so sorry, I'm just trying to that's it, share the change the slide. It's not working for some reason. Right, okay, so part one, exhibition of originals and copies, because these are different in terms of copyright law. Okay, right, so now, as we know, archivists frequently exhibit originals of the material, the items that you have in your collection. We know that we frequently have temporary or permanent displays, either on or off site in display cabinets, and also exhibition panels, which I'll also talk a little bit about as I go through. So the public exhibition of originals themselves is not an act that is restricted by copyright in the UK. However, there are a lot of additional complications, which means that permissions must be sought from copyright holders in certain cases. So, for example, when using copyrighted work in a speech or a play, playing films or videos or sound recordings or broadcasts for the exhibition or an event, websites as well, and also for actually performing the works themselves. So there are a lot of things that we really need to consider here. It's generally considered that exhibitions of copies themselves, although this is making a copy and putting it in an exhibition is not always legitimate, but it's generally considered by copyright experts that the exhibition of actual copies on site is actually fairly low risk, because it's unlikely that the rights owner would object to the use in an exhibition if it is for legitimate purposes. But again, big question marks over that. It very much depends on how your organisation manages risk. So let's think about the different types of material then. So first of all, exhibitions of originals. So here we have literary, dramatic and musical works. So the Intellectual Property Office, the IPO, which essentially governs everything relating to copyright in the UK, states that unauthorised public exhibition of literary, dramatic and musical works is not a copyright infringement. Okay, so this is not a copy, this is the real thing. And exhibiting in law is not considered to be publication of a work. However, the actual communication to the public of the content inside the literary, dramatic and musical works is an act which is restricted itself by copyright. So, for example, as I said, if you want to actually perform the work or perform a work. So these are differentiated between in copyright law. So another type of copyrighted item, of course, is artistic works. So exhibition of originals of artistic works. So once again, the public exhibition of these copyrighted artistic works is not an actual infringement. And once again, the exhibition is not considered to be a publication, in fact. However, we do need to consider that if the author is alive on August 1989 or after, have a moral right to be identified as the author of the artistic work, and therefore we should include captions on exhibited works. We also need to note that we cannot reproduce artistic works in exhibition catalogues without permissions from the right holder, except when they are exhibited for sale. So, for example, auction or sale catalogues. So there are some restrictions in terms of artistic works. And in terms of exhibition of originals, once again, so photographs. Photographs themselves, if it's not a copy, can be exhibited, but we need to consider that photographs taken on or after the 1st of August 1989 and commissioned for private purposes, for example, weddings or private portraits, family portraits, the person commissioning the work has the moral right to provide permissions when works are exhibited. And obviously with photographs as well as with other works, but particularly photographs, we need to consider restrictions relating to data protection and data subjects depicted within the photographic material, of course. Now, related to artistic works, or under the umbrella even of artistic works, is of course the exhibition of the originals, the models, the buildings, sculptures. So this is relevant, this can be relevant to us as archivists. So copyright in buildings, building models and sculptures, works of artistic craftsmanship, so for example stained glass. So these that are on permanent display in a public place or premises open to the public come under what we call the right of panorama. This is an exception fact. So the public place must be always accessible to the public. So for example, a street, the premises need to be open to the public. And this probably includes venues always accessible to the public, but probably venues also open at specific times, including history centres, churches, cathedrals, heritage centres, etc. So as you can see there are still some kind of question marks in terms of the language when we're talking about the exhibition of buildings, models and sculptures. Now, in law, the provision applies to history centre buildings, works, displays in grounds of museums, heritage organisations, or attached to the external structure of these buildings, and relevant works displayed permanently inside these buildings. Although, remember, this doesn't include areas of the building rarely or not at all open to the public. It needs to be in a public space. There is no copyright infringement when painting, drawing or filming, i.e. copying, these buildings, models and sculptures, stained glass, including when broadcasting material. And it is likely the resulting image or footage created as the copy, it is likely that this is actually a new copyrighted work which can be reproduced or sold without infringement. But again, big question marks over that. I mean, essentially, you know, as we'll see in relation to some kind of other elements that we're going to talk about, it's, you know, best practice is to basically, you know, seek permissions from the copyright holder when you can. I mean, these exceptions are very, very difficult to navigate, and sometimes it's just best to seek permission from the copyright holder. Anyway, a kind of belt and braces approach to copyright management. So, exhibition of copies then. Up to now we've been looking at exhibitions of the real thing, but exhibitions of copies, now this is where it starts to get very tricky and thorny and uncertain and unproven in copyright law in the UK. So literary, dramatic, musical and artistic works. So copies made for preservation purposes. So a preservation copy, you know, your digitisation of a tape, so it so that it's you know, for kind of preservation purposes, to capture the content before it is inaccessible. This is acting as an original, so use in the exhibition may not be infringing if the original does not infringe. So if you're showing this copy, however, I'll talk a little bit more about exceptions at the end of part one. There's a lot of, you know, uncertainty around this, so once again I would suggest that where possible you seek permissions. It's Also, there's a lot of uncertainty around whether exhibiting copies of works made for other purposes is an infringement. As I said, I'll talk about some of the exceptions below. Displaying a facsimile copy of an original, so for example, a letter in an exhibition, and also a published work, you know, a book that has been published and then created into a facsimile for preservation reasons. This almost certainly will require permissions from the copyright holder. That is one of the things that the copyright expert Naomi Korn recommends. She's very clear in her view that facsimile copies need permissions sought from the copyright owner. But again, you know, these are kind of some of the interpretations of copyright law. So, related to exhibitions is, of course, the performance of literary, dramatic and musical works. And I've included this because it does impact to a certain extent on exhibitions and, you know, performance. So I'll just give you a general overview of this and how it relates to copyright and exhibitions. So it's usually an infringement to perform a whole or a substantial part of a literary, dramatic and musical work in public without permission, if it is in fact in copyright, of course. So performance actually in copyright law relates to the delivery of a work as a lecture or an address or a speech or even a sermon. In fact, performance also includes a visual or acoustic presentation. So for example, a sound recording or a film or a broadcast which incorporates or includes this literary, dramatic or musical work. There are a few exceptions. So one person is permitted to read or recite a reasonable extract from a published literary or dramatic work, hence, you know, note the word published there. But this must be sufficiently acknowledged as a source by providing the title and the author. So this reading can actually be recorded as a sound recording, or it can be included in a broadcast if it forms a small and insubstantial part of the recording. So there are some exceptions here. So in terms of the a dramatic work, so this is work which relates to drama and essentially comes under the, you know, the heading of theatre here. So public performances of a copyrighted musical work written for a performance as part of a dramatic work, so for example an opera, this comes under the heading of grand rights music licensing. There are lots of, it becomes very complex, and of course this is relevant if you want to include some kind of you know, sound or film within your exhibition. This is where it actually becomes significant to us. But so for the grand rights, so for if you want to you know, perform an opera, you know, which seems unlikely, but I'm sure that this has happened in the past. The licensing is handled by the composer or the publisher, not the Performing Rights Society. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment, because that's also relevant to exhibitions. So the rights in other music is referred to as small rights, and the music licensing for this is handled by the PRS. More on that in just a moment. I mean, this is also relevant because, you know, if you want to put on an event as part of the exhibition, for instance, this is where it also becomes significant and important. So if the music is written for performance as part of a drama performed on its own, the licensing is handled by the PRS for music. More about that in a minute. Only if there is no dramatic content. The music performed is less than a single act, and it's not a condensed version of the work. So as you can see, it's incredibly complex, essentially. if you want to put on any kind of live or most types of kind of live music or performance or dramatic works. So in terms of music generally, as I said, this is relevant to exhibitions, and I'll come on to that just a moment. I'm just kind of putting this into a more general context. So in terms of performing music then, so organisations, venues require a performing rights license to play or perform music that is in copyright in a venue. So for example, a concert hall, at a festival, local authority, theatres, universities. And this is handled by the Performing Rights Society for Music and the Phonographic Performance Limited, or the PPL. The PPL is a music licensing company on behalf of record companies and performers that collects royalties and distributes fees. And in 2018, the PPL and the PRS Limited together launched a joint single licence that organisations can apply for, which is referred to as the music licence. So essentially this is a kind of one-stop place if you are looking to actually perform music within your organisation. And the PRS also issues public exhibition or SG4 licences, which allows organisations to record musical works to play to members of the public as background music to visual displays in an exhibition venue. And this includes audiovisual content for display, audio guides for museum exhibits, music exhibitions, etc. Just one nod then to the online. We also need an online music license. So organisations need an online music license if you are hosting copyrighted content on your website, providing streaming, providing permanent downloads, podcasts that contain music, or webcasting or entertainment. At the moment, this does not actually cover social media platforms. I'm not going to talk about that today because that's a whole different strand, as it were, but essentially this is one of the options. Right, so let's have a look then at film and sound recordings, because very often organisations are interested, in fact, in recording or including film and sound recordings within their exhibition, and this is again where it becomes rather complex. At the end of the day, it's generally, from a copyright point of view, it's generally easier just to display an original, essentially original document, a letter, for instance, or a photograph. It becomes much more complicated when we start to think about film and sound recordings, as we'll see. So playing or showing a sound recording or film in a public place is usually an infringement of the copyrighted work if it is unlicensed. So ideally these need to be licensed if you are going to use them as part of your exhibition or event. I mean, there are of course exceptions to public performance rights. The most common one, of course, is if you work in an educational establishment, you are permitted to perform, play or show copyrighted works for instruction, and if the audience is composed of individuals directly connected to the establishment, so staff and students, for instance. So there are some exceptions there, but it does become very complex. So the Copyright Act from 1988 states that if you're screening a film to audiences in a non-theatre environment, you must obtain consent of a copyright owner. So the unlicensed showing or playing in public of a copyright sound recording or film made on or after the 1st of June 1957 is also a copyright infringement. However, showing the unlicensed showing of a fiction film made before the 1st of June 1957 it is also an infringement, because the film is classed as a dramatic work. However, showing a non-fiction film at the same date may not infringe, as this is protected as a sequence of photographs, and photographs are essentially artistic works, so you can display them, the originals themselves, without infringement. So as you can see, once you start to dig down into this idea of using sound and film recordings and also music, it becomes rather tricky. The music license, of course, issued by the PRS and the PPL for the use of sound recorded music played in public, or in fact used on the internet as well. Now, film itself, if you are looking to play, perhaps as part of an exhibition or an event, a film that you might in fact have in your archive or from elsewhere, perhaps you're looking for a sound recording or a film from another organisation, in fact, to kind of, you know, use as a background to your exhibition. This, in fact, film copyright ownership is generally held by the film studio or the distributor producing the film. But if you're looking for to use material, perhaps you've got material in your collection which you don't, you know, a film that you don't own the copyright to. So if it's a film, there are various places that you can contact if you are looking to actually use that as part of the exhibition space. It's, you know, not necessarily an affordable option, but it's worth knowing that for licenses to show films, there are various places and organisations who deal with this. So the BFI, for example, so copyright experts recommend that organisations contact the BFI. You should also contact Film Media Bank. This organisation represents many Hollywood and independent film studios and distributors, and they license the film screening outside the home or the cinema. They both have excellent websites, and the other one is contact the Motion Picture Licensing Company, or the MPLC, for audiovisual content, films, TV shows, downloads, streaming, broadcast, being viewed outside the home as a public performance. Actually, that's the MPLC website is excellent. In fact, all these websites are excellent. They tell you exactly what you need to know, including the PRS, and it's broken down and it's very, very clear. And some of them have some kind of, you know, the web chat function, so you can actually talk to people there and then. So it seems really, you know, it seems very, very complex, but actually it's, you know, once you start to look into it, it is actually fairly straightforward. So the MPLC licenses for what they call public exhibitions. Exhibitions in its loosest term, the right of the audience to view audio-visual in a public location or organisation. So they use exhibition to mean a kind of a public showing, not in the way that we use exhibition. But these are the places, if you're interested in using copyrighted film, these are some of the places that you're going to start off having conversations with. Sound recordings in films rights are licensed separately, because they are well, they can be music. They're always dealt with separately to the film itself. So in terms of broadcasts then, and again, I'm putting this in just because in copyright law it's actually linked to films and soundtracks as well, just to give you an overview because it may be relevant to something that you want to include in your exhibition. So in copyright law, a broadcast is an electronic transmission of visual, image, sound, or other information transmitted for reception by the public, or transmitted at a time determined by the person making the transmission, for example, the BBC, of course. So the showing or playing in public of copyright broadcast is not an infringement of copyright in broadcast if the audience has not paid for admission and they are not being provided with goods or services on site at the place. However, and this is the issue for us really in the heritage sector, the creation of the copy of a broadcast, so recording something from Radio 3 or Radio 4, for example, and the subsequent playing back of this broadcast is in fact a copyright infringement. So we can't just illuminate our exhibition space by recording something off the radio and then playing it back again to our visitors. Unfortunately, there are many restrictions surrounding this. So in terms of broadcast licensing, if you have something in your collection, so in your collection you might have somebody might have given you a recording of a BBC show from 25 years ago where they featured, for example, well, you don't have the copyright to that, obviously. If you would like to use it as part of your exhibition space, it's generally considered that you should contact the MPLC and or the broadcasting company themselves. So, for example, the BBC as well will deal with that. And this broadcast exception does not anymore, in fact, cover the showing of broadcasted film. So, if it's a film you're wanting to show, a film that you don't have the copyright for, you need to again contact the film licensing organisations. And you will also probably, depending on the nature of the recording, also require a music licence issued by the PRS and the PPL for any use of sound recorded music. Essentially, that is included in that material. So again, just be aware that sound recorded music is treated once again separately. If you're in doubt, it's best to talk to all these organisations and see what you get back, essentially. So there is always research to be done in terms of licensing, and obviously the BBC licence is also required if BBC programmes are shown. That's probably more to do with your kind of live broadcasting rather than making copies and using material from a broadcast within your exhibition space. Right, so that's an overview of copyright and how it relates to exhibitions. Obviously this is a huge topic, so I've kind of just touched on the key points really. Just very quickly before we move on to the case study, look at some possible copyright exceptions for exhibitions. This is a big question mark. There's still a lot of debate about what we can actually include in an exhibition under copyright exceptions. So one of the exceptions is the fair dealing, for the purposes of criticism and review and for the purposes of quotation, because of course we can, in terms of copyright, UK copyright law, we actually can use material or copy or make copies of a material for criticism, review and quotation. So this usually includes images from your collection, for example. If you're, say you have images of Picasso paintings in your collection, this is to put into your corporate plans. That's allowed, conference papers, and also we think text extract in exhibition panels and also sound recordings within exhibition spaces. But it does need to be a lawful extract of the work only, fair dealing in purpose, sufficiently acknowledged, as everything really should be, and lawfully made available to the public, so via exhibition panels and books, not circulated in a illegal manner. Now there is a lot of question about to what extent we can actually create an exhibition panel or part of an exhibition panel for the purposes of criticism and review using a copy. It's a very kind of tricky area, and it is always recommended, of course, to undertake a very high level risk assessment before proceeding with caution on this particular point. Essentially, I mean, at the end of the day, I personally would seek copyright permission here because it's very thorny and unknown. This is also the case for published books or articles, and of course, if this is not unpublished archive material, this is published books and articles, we can quote a reasonable amount, 1 or 2 lines in fact, of copyrighted published material in an exhibition. This may come under the fair dealing quotation exemption, it may do, but you definitely need to credit your quotation. It must be necessary to your requirements, it must provide evidence for the point you are making, and it must be published as well, as I've specified at the beginning of the slide. So again, the organisations needs to undertake a very high level risk assessment before proceeding with caution if you're looking to include this copy within an exhibition or perhaps on an exhibition panel. Again, it's a very, very thorny area, and where possible it's best practice really to seek permissions where you can. We also have fair dealing for the purposes of parody, caricature and pastiche. So there are some possible examples where we can include creative interpretation. So for example, an exhibition panel that uses collection items and displays material, it may be possible to create copies for the parody, caricature and pastiche. However, again, there are a lot of question marks of whether really we can use this exception in terms of exhibition panels. And again, organisations need to undertake a risk assessment before proceeding with caution. And the last point I want to make before we move on to the second part with the case study is this is an area which is again very complex, the dedicated terminal exception. Now this relates to exhibitions because of course increasingly exhibitions use technologies such as turn the pages, like British Library for example. Now there is a lot of debate about whether the dedicated terminal exception for archives, which is essentially digitising the original and putting a digital copy on one computer screen without permission, this is possible. This is the dedicated terminal exception. So this is essentially for preservation and access. But the key thing to remember with this is that it needs to be one computer screen only. That's the issue when it comes to exhibiting material. So it's generally considered that playing clips from preservation copies of film footage or sound recordings from your audiovisual collections in a public exhibition space is not actually a dedicated terminal exception because it's defined as one user at a time. So actually playing your music, for copyrighted music, for example, is this is the audience is several people, 10 visitors to your museum, for example. Whereas with the dedicated terminal exception, you just have one terminal and one viewer at a time. So this is why we think that playing clips from your preservation copies of your audiovisual material is you know, it's tricky, and again, it's best practice really to seek permissions if you are looking to do this. Now, the heritage sector generally, archives, museums, libraries, etc., they are currently exploring touch screen terminals as well as audio and film booths to allow a one-on-one access to digital images under the dedicated terminal exception. So there's still a big question about whether these whether these kind of touch screen terminals turn the pages, etc., on a site, whether these are actually whether we can actually put them under the dedicated terminal exception, because it's only one viewer at a time. If you have one of these touch screens, just one, it may be that in fact you only have one audience member, one visitor essentially viewing it at a time, so it may therefore be a dedicated terminal exception, but a big question mark over that. And it's recommended, of course, as in all these cases, to undertake a high level risk assessment before proceeding with extreme caution. And I put extreme caution there because we're really very unsure about this dedicated terminal exception, because it's all very new and the technology is very new and it hasn't been tested in copyright law much of the time. Right, so I hope that's given you a bit of an overview of how copyright law relates to exhibitions and exhibition spaces. I know it's very complex, but it is essentially an overview of some of the key angles. So I now want to move on and look at the second part, which is the Wac Arts case study. So I just want to have just to tell you a little bit about a project that I worked on over between 2017 and 19, and how the organisation actually managed copyright in terms of exhibiting material. So we'll see that very often with organisations in practice, you know, the copyright recommendations and copyright law is not followed 100%, as it were. You can see that some organisations are more risk. You know, they embrace the risk. This is the case certainly with Wac Arts, and you know, that's all credit to them for actually doing that. So let me talk a little bit about Wac Arts then. So Wac Arts, as you can see here from the website, they are an arts organisation in Camden. The aim of Wac Arts is to empower young people to change the world through the arts. And essentially, Wac Arts offers inclusive performance arts and media programmes for young people aged between 5 and 26. And in actual fact, there are many students of Wac Arts who have been expelled from mainstream education and in fact have transferred to Wac Arts, and essentially it's completely changed and transformed their lives. So it's a very key and significant and important organisation. And Wac Arts is based, like many organisations, at Hampstead Old Town Hall at Haverstock Hill, the London Borough of Camden. So you might know this building is Hampstead Old Town Hall. In fact, it was originally built as a vestry building, so it was actually a kind of ecclesiastical administration building in fact. So the building itself has a lot of history dating back 100 years, 140, over 140 in fact. So Wac Arts received National Lottery Heritage Fund money for its Connecting Communities project. And you can see here, this is part of the heritage page in Wac Arts. You can see here the old town hall is a 140-year-old grade 3 listed building combining Victorian, Edwardian and also modern architecture. So it's this building, in fact, which houses Wac Arts to this day. The building even has a rich heritage of its own, including air raid bunkers underground. So just a little bit about Wac Arts and the archive then. So here, in fact, is a screenshot of the Wac Arts co-founders, Celia Greenwood on the left and Ed Berman on the right here. This material is from the Wac Arts archive. So the archive includes photographic material, absolutely boxes and boxes of this stuff. More photographic material than I've ever seen before, I think, on one of these kind of community archive projects. Audio visual material, absolutely, literally hundreds and hundreds of VHS tapes. Correspondence dating back to the early 20th century, marketing material from Wac Arts and its predecessor organisation when it was called Interaction. Documents relating to, as well, to Hampstead Old Town Hall building. So plans, for example, and even scale models of the building as well. So actually the archive has now been transferred to Camden Archives. So any researchers are now directed to Camden Archives if they wish to use the material as a researcher. Okay, so this is so there were 2 events relating to the HLF project. So the first event, this is the Wac Arts Weekender Event, and this included the first exhibition. So this here is the flyer for the Weekender, as it's called, Festival of Events, celebrating Wac Arts' heritage and also individuals and change makers. I'll talk about them in just a second at Hampstead Old Town Hall, and this took place in July 2019. So here are some photographs. Wac Arts have kindly given me permission to show these and to talk about, in fact, the project today. So these are photographs from the Weekender, the first event and the first exhibition. So the first exhibition, and you can see the exhibition in the background. We use exhibition in a kind of inverted commas form. This took the form of an artistic interpretation using duplicates from the archive, so mainly Wac Arts copyright flyers, for example, posters, postcards, and this was led by the Connecting Communities Project volunteers and also the marketing team. So you can see actually it's kind of like it's more like a display than an exhibition, but it was absolutely excellent. It took up the entire performance space around all 4 walls, in fact, and told the story. It was a kind of timeline, a pop-up timeline, if you like, of the history of the Old Town Hall. Now, the decision was made at this particular event not to play or to use any of the digitised audio-visual VHS, for example, reel-to-reel even we have in this collection, from the archive to accompany the exhibition, as it was deemed too complicated in terms of tracing the copyright holders. And as we've seen before, you know, the audio-visual, that's a whole kind of different level, essentially, of tracing rights holders. So, in fact, this was why it was decided to use Wac Arts copyrighted material only, or largely anyway. And here we can see this is a screenshot from one of the social media platforms, and you can see here where we have this is one of the events that took place, and this is just another shot essentially of the exhibition space that you can see here, with the kind of the display in the background up at the left, on the left there. And we can also see here that, in fact, this is the social media contact for the Open Doors Heritage event, at Wac Arts. So this is the second heritage event, and this was the second exhibition, which took a rather different approach. This took place in September 2019. So the Open Doors exhibition, as you can see here, included panels depicting key individuals and change makers associated with Hampstead Old Town Hall. So, for example, pictured here, we see Una Marson, the Jamaican feminist, activist and writer. I was actually back for the first time since COVID, only last month, and in fact these exhibition panels are still in the building, which is great. You know, it's 2 years later at least, so in the public space. So the archive material that you see here pictured on the exhibition panels, which were created by Wac Arts for the project, includes largely photographs and also correspondence as well, largely. So Wac Arts is not the copyright holder for much of the material, including the photographs that we see here. However, the decision was made by Wac Arts not to research the copyright because of time restrictions, or to seek permission from data subjects, because it was deemed so low risk. So you can see this is a way in which an organisation like Wac Arts, in terms of the copyright, is very much being a kind of, they are friends to risk, essentially. So this was their decision, and they decided that they wanted to manage it in this manner. So this is just to show you some of the other exhibition panels which were created for the event, the Open Doors event and exhibition, the second exhibition. So key individuals and change makers, again, associated with the building. So here we have Rena Lawrence, who was Hampstead's first woman councillor, and she's an American British lawyer and politician, essentially. So the first female councillor in London, in fact. And we also have the other change makers here. On the right, we have Emmeline Pankhurst, who needs no introduction at all, suffragettes, of course. And then on the left, we have also David Pitt, Baron Pitt of Hampstead. He, of course, is a Labour Party politician, a political activist, the second peer of African descent to sit in the House of Lords, and the longest serving Black parliamentarian. So again, these photographs that we see here, and then also correspondence on the right, again, the decision was made not to trace copyright holders, essentially. And to go ahead with the exhibition, this was the decision of the organisation because of the low risk nature of it. Now, the last thing that I want to mention as well in terms of the Wac Arts project. So Wac Arts there's also some excellent heritage blogs which were compiled by the U3A, which is also based at Hampstead Old Town Hall, and partnered with Wac Arts on this project. So heritage blogs, research and written by members of Camden, the history group, for the Connecting Communities project. And again, Wac Arts made the decision not to trace copyright holders and to go ahead and use these images online as they were deemed low risk. If you're interested, this is where the blogs are. I made a decision earlier this week that I wasn't actually going to put any images from the blogs up, because obviously, this is a session on copyright, and I don't want to, I'm aware that some of those images are in copyright, and I don't want to get into trouble for showing them as a copyright session. That's the one thing that you mustn't do in a copyright session, is show copyright images. But putting the links in is fine, and Wac Arts have given me permission to actually do that. So you can, if you're interested, you can have a look at the heritage blogs by members of the Youth Year 3A on that part of the website. Right, so there's further reading, copyright and exceptions here. Obviously we're going to circulate the slides. These are online resources, so these are largely organisations which you can contact if you want to use their copyrighted material, particularly here for sound and film and music. And then also the other resources which I usually share. Heritage Digital, of course, the web link is there. Naomi Corn Associates has some excellent resources there. And another document which I found really useful as well is the Share Museums East document, which again is put together by Naomi Corn, and there is a hyperlink to the site there. And if you want to get, as usual, if you want to get your teeth more into the subject, we have the Naomi Corn and Gordon McKenna publication there. We also have Naomi Corn, Oppenheim and Muir's Information Law 2020, so very recent, only last year. And also Tim Padfield's Copyright for Archivists and Records Management, which is a Bible, although it is, of course, well, you know, as these, in fact, all these publications are slightly out of date in relation to Brexit and copyright in relation to the EU, but just bear that in mind if you use these as resources. Essentially, those are essentially the kind of Bibles, as it were, for copyright experts. Right, so that is the end of my session. I'll just share the screen.
Thank you very much, Ellie. That was very full and not too terrifying, I don't think, but just the volume of differences and things. Yeah, I think it's given a lot of people a lot to think of. So please, if you do have any questions, either pop them into the chat box or if you would like to raise your hand, I'll then invite you to sort of speak. So we have had one question in. Will the status of the exhibition space have a bearing on copyright at all? E.g., if the exhibition takes place somewhere the public do not have access, a private workplace or members-only space?
Okay, so basically the question is about, yeah, if it's a kind of private space, that is a very that is a very good question. Essentially, I think if I'm right in saying it's if it is actually a private space, the making of the copies itself, yeah, it's no different if it's in a private space, if you're talking about the making of the copies, essentially. So if it's in a private space, it's still kind of for the members of the public, which is a kind of, you know, very generic term. So really that in terms of kind of copyright generally, so I'm not talking about you know, exhibiting sculptures or that kind of thing, but generally, yeah, in terms of copyright generally, in terms of exhibiting originals and exhibiting copies, essentially, yeah, you still have an audience. So yeah, it's essentially, I would imagine that it's kind of the same. It still applies. UK copyright law would still apply in this case. Obviously, there are kind of some tricky exceptions when it comes to you know, thinking about buildings and sculptures and that kind of thing. But so there are potentially some exceptions there, but in a kind of broad blanket way, you know, the copyright kind of is applies to everywhere, essentially, copyright law.
Thank you. And is there a template or a decision model to decide if using an image is low risk? How did WAC do it?
Well, yeah, to be honest, it was, you know, I was consultant on the project. It was actually managed by, the exhibition itself was actually managed by the essentially the kind of promotions team, as it were. So essentially, what happened is I wrote the team and the organisation. I wrote them some kind of essentially some recommendations as to how they should be exhibiting material and what the different options were. Essentially, so you know, they had my bullet point recommendations, but they, you know, they essentially took that material and kind of interpreted it, my material, and kind of interpreted it for themselves. So they didn't kind of have a template of any kind, you know, a kind of yes, no, we should exhibit this, you know, we shouldn't exhibit this. It was just a general feeling that they decided that they were so keen on exhibiting what they had that that was a kind of overriding drive, essentially, in terms of what they wanted for the organisation. So for them, you know, copyright was less important. Partly this is because they're not, you know, they're not an organisation which is a, you know, they're a theatre and performance. They're ostensibly an educational institution. So that, you know, they're not an archive. They're not a museum. You know, so they have a slightly different kind of view and a slightly different hat on about exhibiting materials. Essentially, so it would be excellent to have a copyright exhibition checklist, and that is something which I haven't come across as yet, unfortunately. I'm not sure that it actually exists, and I'm not sure that it actually exists within many organisations, but hopefully in due course that will be the case.
Thank you very much. There's no further questions just now. If anybody does want to do it, please do so now. But in the meantime, I'd just like you to all join me in thanking Ellie very much for her presentation today. And as she mentioned, we will have one more session with Ellie later on at the end of November, early December. We're just debating a date just now, and it will be on licensing, so it will sort of pick up quite a few of the sort of issues raised here as well. Oh, good, another question has come in. Just finally, any advice on exhibiting audio-visual material within your collection that was commissioned by your organisation but created by an external filmmaker? For most of the films, there is no surviving material on that commission. For example, staff training videos.
Yeah, should we? Can I answer that by email? Is that okay?
Of course, I will take Melissa's details and pass them on to you as well. And just the other one that's just sort of come in about streaming, is it covered by the same rules as broadcasting?
Well, streaming online is, yeah, it's essentially something which is covered by the as I mentioned, you know, the streaming online is essentially covered by one of the kind of music. So if it's a kind of if it's music, then it's going to be, you need to look at the kind of Performing Rights Society or the music license. So you need to you know, you need to look at their material recently, essentially.
That's super. We'll leave it there today. That's us at our hour. So thank you very much again, Ellie. And the recording for this will be available up on the SCA website the next day or two as well. So yeah, have good afternoons, everyone. Thanks very much. And thank you very much again, Ellie. Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Thanks.